Hi, Crimies. I'm your host, MAB, and we are going to dive into part 2 of the Justin Bourque case. If you're coming back to spend time with me, I really appreciate it and welcome back. If you're new, welcome to you as well. Again, please remember to share, subscribe, like, comment, do all of the things. It's super appreciated. So before we quickly recap the episode from last week, which was part 1, please listen to the following disclaimer.
The content delivered through this podcast will at times be graphic in nature and describe criminal conduct which includes but is not limited to violence, sexual assault, and homicide. All suspects described in the podcast are considered innocent until they are found guilty in a court of law. I'm not an expert on any subjects covered, I'm just an interested party. The content will be troubling and upsetting to some people, therefore, viewer or listener discretion is advised.
So last week we discussed the chaos that Justin Bourque, a 24-year-old man dressed in camouflage and seriously armed, caused in the city of Moncton, and there was a 28-hour manhunt to capture him. During this manhunt, he took the lives of 3 constables and wounded 2 others. So let's pick up where we left off last week. Welcome to episode 14, part 2, Justin Bourque. So this manhunt for Justin started on June 4th, 2014, and he was finally captured on June 6th, 2014, so just a few days later. And again, just as an honorable mention, the 3 constables that lost their lives that day were constables David Ross, 32 years old, Fabrice Georges Gévaudan, 45 years old, and Douglas James Larch, 40 years old. And just to quickly summarize how they died as well, in an agreed statement of facts, it outlined that David Ross died of a gunshot wound to the head, Fabrice Gévaudan died of 2 shots to the chest, and Douglas Larch died from 2 shots, one to the neck and one to the flank area. I know we covered in the first episode how normal Justin's upbringing seemed. He was born into a religious family and he was homeschooled. So I guess homeschool is a little different than what most of us have experienced growing up. And we also discussed how he had always seemed to have issues with authority, like police, his bosses, and yes, even his parents. He had really strong anti-authority and anti-government views. And I guess he previously talked about killing himself and even others. I'm not sure if anything was ever said or done about this because I feel like today, anything of that nature needs to be taken seriously, especially after all of the shootings that we experience or that we know about. I think we're a little more hyper aware than maybe we were back then. But I couldn't find anything pertaining to whether or not someone acted on his admission or not. So we know he said it. We don't know what happened, if anything. Something else I found interesting that just a few days before his rampage happened, he was chatting with his dad and just randomly ranting about figures of authority, and he seemed sort of paranoid. So his dad just felt he had been kind of off the past little while, and actually in later documents, his parents Victor and Denise had told a probation officer that they had noticed a drastic change in their son that started around December 13th, 2013. So about 5 or 6 months before any of this happened. So if you remember in the last episode, Justin and his friend had gone to buy ammunition to go shooting at the shooting range that day, later that day, I guess. Well, shortly after the crime happened, World's End Warehouse, which again is an outdoor ammunition supply store, they actually issued a statement on their Facebook page confirming that Justin was known by the employees and staff at the store, but that he was never a customer and had never even purchased firearms or ammunition there. And I think this is also a good time to mention that, just in case you didn't know, because I honestly had no idea, in Canada, if you're concerned about the mental state or intentions of a firearm owner, you can actually notify the Canadian Firearms Program so that they can investigate and an investigation can be launched into that matter for that person. So I thought that was really interesting. Justin had also made odd posts on Facebook during the days leading up to the crime. So I feel like there were signs, but maybe there weren't. Hindsight's 2020. Not long after he was captured, he admitted responsibility for the shootings, saying his goal was to spark rebellion against the Canadian government, mainly for believing they were all corrupt and getting wealthy at the expenses of regular citizens. Justin made his first court appearance on June 6th, which is the day he was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. He then appeared in Moncton Provincial Court on July 3rd, and he had to undergo a psychiatric evaluation requested by his attorney to determine whether he was fit to stand trial, and he was, so another court date was set for July 31st. On August 8th, Justin would plead guilty to the 3 counts of first-degree murder and the 2 counts of attempted murder. And I think it's also important to note that he never ever, not once, tried to deny this or to not admit his guilt for his actions, I guess, that day. On October 27th, he apologized to the family members of the deceased officers, and I can't help but wonder if this was sincere or just what he was coached to say by someone else, maybe his defense team or whoever. Because during the interview after he was captured, the investigator asked him, would you do anything differently? If I could take you today, bring you back to your dad's house yesterday, or, June 3rd, before any of this happened, would you change anything? And Justin did reply with, quote, "I would bring water. I mean, clearly, something is not right there." Then on October 31st, so Halloween, Chief Justice David Smith gave Justin 2 concurrent life sentences for the 2 attempted murders and 3 consecutive life sentences for the 3 premeditated murders. Now, not only were the sentences serious to truly reflect how serious the crimes were, but the judge also told Justin and his team that he would not be eligible for parole for 75 years. And this was actually the most severe and the harshest sentence that was given to a person since the abolishment of capital punishment in 1967. And if you've listened to my other episodes, you'll remember that this was also how Ambrose and Hutchison managed to escape being sent to hang, to death, I guess, prior to 1967. But then their sentences were converted to life in prison when the death penalty was off the table and capital punishment was abolished. As much as I personally think that 75 years without parole was just, and it did match the crime, in 2022, his parole ineligibility period was reduced to 25 years because the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that excessively long non-parole periods were unconstitutional. And just a side note here, just because he becomes eligible for parole, it does not mean that they will have to let him out or that he will be released. It just means that he can apply, but his application, thankfully, can still be denied. So hopefully we can trust that our judicial system will come through for civilians on this side of the bars. Stephen Harper, who was the Prime Minister of Canada at the time, released a statement saying, quote, "On behalf of all Canadians, Laureen and I offer our deepest condolences to the families, colleagues, and friends of those affected by this tragedy. We also offer our prayers for the speedy recovery of those injured." End quote. This entire situation caused questions to be asked regarding how well equipped the RCMP and their officers who responded to the scenes of the crime were. An investigation was launched to decide or determine whether the 5 officers were adequately armed and protected to deal with Justin. And personally, I would say that they clearly were not. A service pistol is no match for a rifle of any kind. Honestly, that's just my opinion. This also referenced the Mayor Thorpe incident, which, again, I will cover in a later podcast episode. But that tragedy happened in 2009, and it left 4 officers dead. Ultimately, I think that they were questioning why officers were still only bringing pistols and the odd shotgun into a rifle fight, or potential rifle fight, I guess. After Mayor Thorpe, they were supposed to receive carbine guns. However, a taser incident at the time kind of put the weapon carrying issue to the side, which shouldn't have happened. I'm not sure how you can decide that a taser incident is taking precedence over what weapons the frontline protecting civilians are carrying. So there's an episode of Crime Beat that goes more into detail about the entire carbine gun situation, and I'll link it in the show notes in case it's of interest to you. Then I would welcome you to go watch that. One of the wives, Nadine Larch, expressed that change in the organization was needed before history can repeat itself. And I kind of need to agree because I think the events from that day could have completely unfolded differently had changes been implemented prior to this incident. And listen, I know people are very opinionated when it comes to gun control, gun rights, and gun laws. Justin had acquired all of his firearms legally. So it's not like he had, a scraped serial number or a sawed-off shotgun. They were all acquired legally. This will also bring many to emphasize that guns don't kill people. People kill people. So I guess my question to you is, or to my crime community, when and why would there ever be a need for someone to own a rifle such as the M14? Please comment below. I'm not a gun owner. I have never gone hunting, so I really honestly don't know, and I'm genuinely curious. On May 3rd, 2022, Justin was tried in Miramichi Provincial Court because it was alleged that he committed aggravated assault by wounding Chase Spence, a correctional officer, while he was at the Atlantic Institution. Allegedly, Justin had harmed Spence with a homemade shank or a homemade weapon that he had in his possession, and there was video surveillance of the incident. So it showed Chase Spence walking down a corridor or a long sort of hallway, holding bags of things and possessions that belonged to Justin. So on the video, you can see the two exchanging words, but because the video had no sound, we'll never truly know what was said between the two. Then you can see Spence take a step back, and it looks like he punches Justin in the neck. So that's when Justin pulls his hands from out of his pockets, and you can kind of tell he's holding a shank or like a weapon of some sort. There was also another inmate involved in the incident, and later you can observe Spence fall to the floor, and what follows was out of frame, which is kind of convenient, I guess. So we don't know what happens after he falls to the floor, but it has been confirmed that Spence suffered stab wounds to the neck, and he was treated in hospital for his injuries, and he did survive. Side note here. I'll never say it's okay to use a weapon or to stab someone, obviously, but Spence was in the wrong too. If he punched Justin in the neck, regardless of what the exchange of words were, and he initiated the fight, then I'm pretty sure that's not in your list of duties as a correctional officer either. So I'm not sure what happened to him after, whether he's still working in that position or not, etc. While doing my research, I also found a CTV News article that stated that Justin was sleep deprived and felt depressed prior to the shootings, and that he had likely reached his breaking point. In a psych evaluation or a psych assessment later administered, it showed signs prior to or leading to the day of June 4th. It described that weeks before the murders, Justin was working like 15 hours a day at work, and he was only getting approximately 2 hours of sleep at night. And to add to that and make matters worse, he couldn't afford the weed he had become to heavily rely on to get through his day-to-day tasks. So he's broke. He doesn't have weed anymore. He's not sleeping. Like, these are all factors that can just sort of, I guess, amplify somebody's way of feeling. It also indicates that Justin left in a blind rage that day and never thought he would be coming back alive. Justin had always come across as sort of cold and detached. In his police interview, he said he felt pretty accomplished after the shootings. That, to me, is disturbing. Accomplished would not be a word that I would expect someone to use after fatally shooting some police officers or human beings, period. But those were his words. So, while this is what he chose to say to express his feelings about the crimes during the initial police interrogation, on page 6 of the psych report, Justin said he regretted his actions and had all intentions of pleading guilty. So, I don't know. He seemed pretty proud initially, and even if you have all intentions of pleading guilty, that doesn't spell out remorse for me. Words are words. Anyone can say anything, especially if you're coached or suggested or, enticed to say such things. However, actions are actions, and they do speak louder than words. There's also a report included that sort of outline descriptions of sessions with a psychologist and interviews that a social worker had with Justin's parents and his roommate, one of his roommates. So in this report, Justin describes himself as generous, energetic, adventurous, outspoken, and at times absent-minded. He also said, quote, "I want everyone to be my friend," end quote. Well, I think you went about it the wrong way. I remember in something I watched also that one of his friends said something like he remembered being stranded one time for whatever reason. I don't know. I can't remember if the engine died on his vehicle or what happened, but he didn't have a way home. And when he called Justin to come get him, Justin came, no questions asked, no hesitation. And his friend went on to say that he had just always been a good guy. He was just that kind of guy. And he would never have expected this from him. And before I keep going with legal documents, I do want to take a few minutes to talk about the victims who lost their lives in the line of duty. First victim, Dave Joseph Ross, was born May 22nd, 1982. RCMP number 54868. He was Rachel's husband and Austin's dad. Rachel was pregnant and they were expecting the birth of their second son that fall, so literally months after he died. He was a general duty member who had recently achieved the role of police dog service handler. He actually loved being one of the first called to chase bad people who were hiding in dark and dangerous places, and that's exactly what he was doing the day of his death. If you ask Dave about his family, he would always say it not only included his wife and son, but also Danny, his canine partner. Victim number 2. Douglas James Larch was born January 18th, 1974. RCMP number 49269. He was the son of Dan Larch, who was a retired Mountie. He had a wife, Nadine, and 3 young daughters, Mia, Lauren, and his little princess, Alexa. He was involved in his daughter's school by making presentations. He really wanted kids to know that he would keep them safe. Initially, he was posted in Doketown, New Brunswick. Then he transferred to the Kodiak Detachment, where he worked general investigations and serious crime. The night he died and rushed to the call, he was in plain clothes. Something else definitely worth mentioning that I was able to find, in 2008, he had received a medal for saving the life of an unconscious baby. That's a pretty good show of character. And last but definitely not least, victim number 3, Fabrice Georges Gévaudan, born January 14th, 1969. RCMP number 55685. Fabrice was born in France and later on chose to make Canada his home. In 2008, he graduated from the RCMP Academy after obtaining his citizenship for our country. When he married Angela, he also became a stepdad or bonus dad to 11-year-old Emma. He was a general duty member, and he was also a police diver. He liked and appreciated strong, confident women, which, side note, must say a whole lot about his wife, and was really disgusted by cases of domestic violence. He was described as being an optimist with a quick wit. In his own way, he led many others. Also, in the last episode, I said I would refrain from posting graphic pictures and that I would also not post any videos or audios of the 911 calls, which have since been unsealed and released and are available online. If you want to go digging for them, fill your boots. So let me now explain why over the next little bit, and hopefully it'll make sense to you, or why I'm refraining from doing that. It's really more out of respect for the families than anything else. So now I just want to go over a few court documents. The Crown and defense had opposed the release of certain portions of the evidence, described as follows, and I'll just list them out. Pictures of Constable Darlene Gauguin depicting her injuries, and then the same thing for the injuries of Constable Éric Dubois, and some other photos. Some transmissions from police radio, and some 911 calls where shots can be heard. And last, some of Justin's statements. So essentially, as a general rule, Canadian courts are fairly open and transparent, and I know the next bit is going to include some legal jargon, so I just want to quickly explain the Dagenet-Mentuck test. So the Dagenet-Mentuck test requires the party opposing media access to demonstrate that the order for the ban is necessary to prevent serious risk to the proper administration of justice. Basically, this means that the party who is requesting a media ban has to have a really good reason proving that it would negatively impact the case by not banning certain portions of evidence. And I can say that often it would impact the families, friends, colleagues of the victims, etc. 1,000,000%. Unfortunately, that's not what they consider when they allow a media ban. The documents indicate that Staff Sergeant Gorman spoke to the widows of the slain officers, and they had listed items that they did not want to be released to the media, which is why I'm not showing any of this in my podcast episode. The offender also opposed the release of the video of the police interview, which Justin gave shortly after his capture. But he gave the statement knowing it was being recorded. And at the hearing, Justin expressed anger at his behavior during the interview. Nothing showed that it was in the best interest of the administration of justice to ban the video of the offender's confessions, so that request was denied. On December 14th, the final decision was stated as follows. The application by the Crown and counsel for the defense is denied, and all evidence submitted at the sentence hearing will be copied and released to the public and the media. Then the affidavit from Staff Sergeant Ross Gorman had some information too. So I'm just going to break this down for you. He said on November 10th, 2014, he provided a list of multimedia exhibits to Nadine Larch, Rachel Ross, and Angela Gévaudan, the spouses of the slain officers. Nadine provided a list of what she was hoping would not be released. Here's an itemized list. A 911 call from Sean Rooney because shots fired at her husband could be heard on that call. A video taken by Vanessa, which captured the shooting of Constable Larch on her cell phone. Her husband can be seen collapsing to his death next to his unmarked car. To that last point, she didn't want the video released because she would never want her girls to see that. No child should ever see their parent being killed. And I can't disagree, honestly. Gorman did the same thing for Rachel Ross, and this is what she did not want to have released. She said the dignity of the dead and privacy should be respected. Kids don't need to see pictures and videos of their dads being shot. A video where Dave Ross can be heard saying he has eyes on Justin. She was scared that this could be turned into an attempt to depict humor somehow. And then finally, Gorman did the same thing for Angela Gévaudan. This was her list of requests. She didn't want a picture of the vest released depicting Gévaudan's vest at the location where the RCMP members were performing CPR. A photo of his shirt in the garage where RCMP resumed CPR. It was full of his blood and medical equipment could be seen on the ground next to the shirt. An audio recording where the officer is shouting, quote, "He's shooting at me, he's shooting at me," end quote. And some clips from Justin's statement, and actually Justin's statement in its entirety. So again, I found a lot of audio online, but I will not be playing any of it or the videos, once again, out of respect for these families. It's not my vibe, it's not my style. If you know me, you know me. Another affidavit was from Lise Godbout, who was the psychologist employed by Government of Canada, and she also provided her statement of facts. She stated that she had actively provided occupational health services to the RCMP members who were affected by the events of June 4th, 2014. She had been offering these services since the day of the events for multiple people. She stated that many members of the RCMP had taken medical leave due to the trauma from the events of June 4th, and while some had gone back to work, many were still vulnerable to triggers. This never goes away, obviously. It's a pretty traumatic life event, so yes, I'm sure triggers are a thing. Leading up to the sentencing hearing, which was scheduled for October 27th and 28th of 2014, the RCMP team prepared and put together information to share with the families so that they could be prepared and know exactly what to expect during the trial. So essentially, the family was given advance notice of all of the content that would be presented. It was an emotional time before the sentencing hearing for everyone involved and for everyone attending the presentations of evidence. They heard things like the following. Constable Dagg and Nickerson heard each other on the audio or on the radio out of breath while giving Gévaudan CPR. Constable Gauguin heard herself yelling that she had been shot and requesting assistance. She thought she would die while waiting for help. Gévaudan's wife heard her husband say that he was shot, knowing that only a few seconds later, he would be hit with a second shot that would be fatal. Dave Ross's wife heard him say he could see the suspect before he too was shot to death. And the wife of Constable Larch could hear her husband arriving at the scene where he was then shot to death. Plus the cell phone video footage that captured the entire scene. This must have been so difficult for loved ones to go through. I can't even imagine. I know I say that at least once an episode, but I literally cannot imagine. And finally, the Court of Appeals decision. So, judgment was rendered on March 2nd, 2023, and describes the following points. And before I go into the points, the Court of Appeal was to appeal basically the 75 years that Justin got of parole non-eligibility. So his legal team felt it was excessive and they wanted to fight that. Justin pled guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison for each count. I'm behind that 100%. At the time, for a person convicted of murder and who had already been charged of murder, like in this case, 1 or more murders, allowed a sentencing judge to weigh certain factors and decide whether the periods of parole ineligibility should be served consecutively. So basically meaning one after the other, no breaks in between, no interruptions. So in this case, the judge decided that the periods would be served consecutively for a total of 75 years, like I mentioned earlier. This would have meant that Justin would not have been eligible for parole until the age of 99. It's also important to note that Justin did not appeal that decision within 30 days, which is what is prescribed in the rules of court. So technically, they could have denied this appeal. Technically. Section 12 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom guarantees the right to not be subjected to any cruel and unusual treatment or punishment. This applies to individuals, not corporations, and is engaged when the state is responsible for the treatment or punishment. The case that was used as reference for Justin Bourque's appeal was the case of Alexandre Bissonnette. So on January 29th, 2017, he opened fire at the Great Mosque in Quebec. He murdered 6 people, seriously wounded 5 others, and he attempted to kill many, many other people. While he did get multiple life sentences, they determined that he would need to serve 40 years before he could apply for parole. So Alexandre took the life of a lot more people than Justin, but Justin had a longer period of parole ineligibility. Was this because it was officers versus civilians? Did it hit different for that reason? In my opinion, and this might be an unpopular opinion, but in my opinion, a life is a life. Whether it's the life of the Pope or of the homeless guy I see on the street corner daily, it's a human life, period. How can one life be worth more than another? In my opinion, it isn't. In using Alexandre's case, they asked for an extension of time to file a notice of appeal so they could study the case and see how they could apply similarities to Justin's case. The court essentially goes on to say that it doesn't mean he'll be released in 25 years, as I mentioned earlier, but only that he can apply for parole then. The parole board generally proceeds with caution and care before they make decisions as important as these. Something else I forgot to mention in the last episode when I said that Justin and a friend purchased ammunition to go shooting later that day at the gun range. Justin had no money, so Nathan, his friend, is actually the one who paid for the purchase, and I'll post a picture of the receipt. Another quick note on June 6th, 2014, when Justin got arrested, he elected to be served in English. And when they told him he had rights to counsel and asked if he understood, he said, quote, "I'll have to talk to my folks about that. We're pretty poor. I know how much trouble I'm in." End quote. Also, later as part of the investigation at the crime scene, a total of 15 spent .308 casings and 1 live cartridge were recovered. So, this concludes part 2 of the Justin Bourque episode. I hope it all made sense to you, and I hope that I was able to provide some clarity on the events of the few days of chaos Moncton had to endure in 2014. As always, I appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in and choosing to spend your time with me on this Sunday or whenever you're doing it. Driving to work, cleaning, morning coffee, whatever. I appreciate you. Please tune in next Sunday at 11 a.m. for an all-new episode. I will release a short and quick update for Lily and Jack this week at some point. I'm not sure exactly when it's going to be, but it will definitely be outside of my regular Sunday schedule, and it's not going to be very long. So as you know by now, crime is a waste of time, and until next time, bye, crimies.